Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books. It's September already somehow, and here's a clue as to what we're talking about today. It's Shaketember, the plays, the poems, the life of William Shakespeare through a booktube prism. And I want to start talking today about the first folio from 1623. It's a bit of an understatement to say that this is an influential publication. But what I want to use as my jumping off point is something that the first folio does before you read the first line of the first play. It splits all the plays into three categories: comedies, tragedies, and histories. Timon of Athens, Troilus and Cressida are classed as tragedies. Maybe they're not in the classical meaning, but we can stretch a point. The histories are pretty well defined, as you can imagine. If it starts with a Henry or a Richard, it goes in the pile. But I think you can make an argument for Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, even Macbeth, to go under that category. But it's the comedies where I think people have more contention. We have plays under the comedies like Measure for Measure, and the one I want to talk about today, The Merchant of Venice. Comedy may be a broader, more nebulous category, but I would still struggle to pigeonhole those two plays under comedy. Shakespeare was a master of tragedy and comedy, but he did serve up some plays which were neither fish nor fowl. How to categorise these? And the answer to this question came in the form of a problem. Categorising some of Shakespeare's output as problem plays began in the late 19th century. The term didn't originate with or for Shakespeare. It was a term that had previously been applied to the plays of Henrik Ibsen. Plays that are more complex, more ambiguous, shift in their tone. F.S. Boas, the critic, was the first to posit plays in the problem play category for Shakespeare, and he chose All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida. Others later added three more plays: The Winter's Tale, Timon of Athens, and the one, as I said, I'm talking about today, The Merchant of Venice. And it will be this half dozen plays that I'll be looking at during September. And starting this with The Merchant of Venice, I think starts it with probably the most problematic of the problem plays. So why is The Merchant of Venice classified as a comedy? Why is it under that listing? It's because it sort of is. Take a brief, short step back to 3rd century BC Greece, and we have that switch from old to new comedy. Old comedy. Think of Aristophanes. These are satirical, with parodies of public figures. Replace that with the new comedy. Fictional characters rather than public figures now. Not heroes, not gods, just ordinary, average citizens. No chorus as such, or a reduced job for the chorus, and slowly being replaced by a group of accompanying musicians to the play. And we see stock characters introduced into comedic drama. the boisterous, vainglorious military hero, the thwarted lovers, censorious or cruel parents, sneaky merchants, cunning and wise fools. From Menander in Greece to Plautus and Terence in Rome, through Shakespeare, through the Commedia dell'arte, Restoration drama, through to Animal House and Porky's, these characters turn up again and again. And a component of this kind of comedy is intergenerational strife, and a must-have is a happy ending. In short, if you have a tragedy, that's got to end in a lot of deaths. A comedy will end in a lot of marriages. So The Merchant of Venice is a comedy, case closed. But that's the problem, because it's not funny. Some people may say many of Shakespeare's comedies aren't funny. I respectfully disagree. What Shakespeare does with The Merchant of Venice stretches that definition of comedy. And that is because of B, the story of Shylock. He's a wily merchant in that stock character cast, but he is one that breaks the mould. And with Shylock, we have the additional problem to this problem play. A problem that would not have occurred to the Elizabethan contemporary audience. It may not have occurred to many of the late Victorians who started to use this term problem play. But we can't talk about The Merchant of Venice without looking at the treatment of Jews. The Merchant of Venice is much more famous for its dramatic scenes and the speeches of Shylock and of Portia than it is for any of its comedic plot lines. It's a problem that Shakespeare deliberately has introduced into the equation with the character of Shylock. The story of a deadly forfeit to a mercantile bond was common at the time. The play takes much from a story by Giovanni Fiorentinis, and it's here Gianetto of Venice and the Lady of Belmont from this book, Elizabethan Love Stories. So that's a 14th century tale, and there's a new translation in here. I say new, this is from 1960 something. In fact, I can tell you it's 29th of February 1968, so a leap year. I know this is my wife's book, so I'm being very careful. This is an advanced review copy. Sorry, back to the story. So it's from I think it's from a collection, Il Pecorone. It's Gianetto of Venice and the Lady of Belmont. I also read that story this week as I was reading the play. The Jewish usurer is there in the story, but he is not even mentioned by name and has no backstory. Here in The Merchant of Venice, we get much more of an idea of why Shylock acts as he does. Is The Merchant of Venice anti-Semitic? I think it can be. And I think that largely depends on the production that is made of the text. From unconscious choices and unconscious bias in the portrayal of Shylock to very conscious choices in editing the script, and people have been guilty of that quite a bit. But there is an argument to be made that Shylock is given a comparatively sympathetic portrayal. That word, comparatively, is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but you could construct a case. 1. His background. As a Jew in Venice, he is able to lend money where the Christians are not allowed to lend money. I'm not quite sure what the situation was in Venice, but in large parts of Europe, that idea of Jews always lending money was because those rules of usury didn't apply to them or weren't enforced on them under their religion, but also because their capital sort of had to be liquid because they weren't allowed to own properties. But although the laws of usury do not allow Christians to lend money, they're allowed to borrow it. The merchants of Venice, Antonio, and others in Venice have been, for some time, according to Shylock, been castigating Shylock. Insults, spitting, all manner of ill behaviour, because he is a filthy usurer and, by extension, insulting his religion. But then they turn around and they're happy to borrow money from him because there's no religious law against hypocrisy. It's something that Shylock alludes to in that speech, which I'll read badly here. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000. Laughed at my losses, mocked my gains, scorned my nations, thwarted my bargains, called my friends, heated mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Have not a Jew eyes, have not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Point 2. He's a controlling father, admittedly. But we've talked about comedy and that intergenerational strife. But does he really deserve that betrayal by his daughter Jessica, who not only elopes with a man of another faith, but also steals a considerable sum of money from him, including jewellery, including the ring that was left to him by his late wife, who in the play he talks about quite touchingly, if in passing. The elopement follows the laws of Elizabethan comedy, but it does Shylock no favours. And thirdly, the portrayal of Shylock in the play, I would say, is comparatively sympathetic, and this is how much heavy lifting that word comparatively is doing. Jews were not allowed in England at this time. So just having one on the stage, not being a 100% villain, is, I don't want to say good work Shakespeare, but it could have been a lot worse. Jews had been expelled from Britain 3 centuries previously in 1290 by Edward I. This was a law only repealed some 65 years after this play, under the interregnum reign of Oliver Cromwell. One of the few good things he did whilst he was in charge. But you will not find many other sympathetic portrayals elsewhere in literature of the time and the time following. In fact, the time before. Chaucer is anti-Semitic in one of those tales where we have a Jewish character. Contemporaneous to Shakespeare, we have Marlowe, the Jew of Malta, which I read this week, may end up talking about at some other point. Dickens and Fagin. Into the 20th century with Woolf, War, Eliot, especially Eliot. Luckily, Ezra Pound isn't even English, so I can't include him in this list, otherwise he would be at the top. But whether we are talking about Barabbas, Fagin, Svengali, Bleistein with a cigar, none of these portrayals or images evinces that plea for visibility and equality like that speech from Shylock does. But let's not kid ourselves. He is the villain. He's also emblematic of that controlling father figure, which is expressed to the nth degree in Portia's father, who is controlling her from the grave with his little game of caskets. The theme of fatherhood is also presumably why we have those scenes between Gobbo and his father. I can't really find any other reason for their inclusion. But we should, of course, have a clown because this is a comedy. But the Shylock plot really upsets things. It's odd to think that the scenes where Shylock has the tables turned on him are not the climax of the play. The merchant of Venice, Antonio, is saved and the villainous Jew forcibly converted to Christianity. We have to ask Antonio at this point, when he made that decision, what quality of mercy this is. Anyway, all of that story concludes in Act 4, Scene 1, and we have nearly another 2 full acts about the relatively trivial tying up events, a little game with rings which just allows all the married couples to have a little moment of worry and then live happily ever after. Much more in the normal comedic vein of things, and just something which most people, if they're talking about the Merchant of Venice, totally ignore. So Shakespeare's portrayal of Shylock is much more central to the play than the Jewish usurer in the original story. Much more nuanced than the psychotic Barabbas from the Jew of Malta. And it unbalances the play as a comedy, and definitely, for my money, posits it in that problem category. That unbalancing makes it a tricky customer for analysis as a comedy, at least for my part. I mean, it's Shakespeare. People will definitely have done it. It will be their literature about it in reams and libraries of criticism. This is just some brief musings about it. But my problems are only just beginning, because I'm reading the rest of the problem plays this month for Shaketember. But until next time, bye.